If you are watching us live on one of the wonderful streaming services that we are on, please come join us, sellerroundtable.com/live. And we are going to get started here shortly with Josh. Josh is going to tell you how to make sure that your business is ready to exit. So we're going to talk all of that fun stuff. And I'm semi-distracted right now because, of course, my switchboard is unauthorizing one of my channels, which is always a blast when that happens. Hopefully that's fixed now.
Is it LinkedIn? Because I always have a problem with LinkedIn.
LinkedIn does it a lot. No, this time it's Facebook, though. So maybe they're mad. They read my post about me not wanting to be on Facebook anymore, and they're like, we'll show you.
Cut off. It's over for you, Andy. It
right?
wouldn't be the first time.
This would be number 4 if that happened. So, all right.
You're worse than, well, I was going to say you're worse than Donald Trump, but no, you're not. You're
you
far.
know what? You know what? I didn't like the guy. I thought, as a business person, he's pretty phenomenal. So I think you could compare me to worse. You could, at least you're not calling me like Kim Jong-un or something like that, or Putin. Then I'd be a little offended. But
I mean, Korea's, marketing strategy is pretty interesting, right?
It is. Yeah. They're the structure of running that business is definitely not the way I would do it, but all to their own, I guess.
Here we go, folks. This is where you find the good crossover of business and
exactly.
politics.
Yeah.
Josh is staying quiet. He's like, nope, I'm not even. I know we're live right now. I'm not doing it.
Oh my God. Like, so it literally,
all day.
Yeah. So it literally logged me out of like every Facebook thing. So you know what? We're just going to go back to that later. And if you're not on like LinkedIn or one of the other channels that are actually working right now, you know what? I'll do your group too, Amy, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
So frustrating.
Sounds good.
It hasn't done this to me in a while. So, normally I like kind of go in and make sure it's spooled up. But anyway, all right. It's trying. Groups. People are having a lot of fun watching this live, I'm sure. There it is. Amazing at home. Okay. I think we should be good now. We should be going there. Let me go live on there and then. Okay. All right. Let's do the recording. Sorry about that, folks. This is live TV, live media. All right. Let's do this. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Andy Arnott with
Amy Weiss.
And this is Seller Roundtable number 154. We have Josh Dietrich on today. Josh, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Hello, Amy. How are you guys?
Fantastic. Great. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, Josh, we always like to start out with, we call it street cred. So would love to know kind of your backstory. You can go as deep or as shallow as you want. But we love to hear kind of where you're born, hard knocks, how kids would flick boogers at you in school, any of those kind of, gory details. We absolutely love to hear those.
The gory details, boy, man, we could get really creative with that, but these would probably be inappropriate. So we'll skip those ones. I grew up actually in the middle of a cornfield, sort of the town did in Iowa, 3.5 hours away. And so it was the town you grow up in that if you don't leave, you're called a townie, right? So I think that's probably universal language, but I had to get out and that just means going to college, move on to the next thing of life. So shortly after 18, moved up to the big city on my own, started in video broadcasting. That was my plan, being on camera. Look at me, mom, I made it. Or audio, radio, video, all that stuff. So I kind of quickly realized it was going to be tough to have a family and, travel the world doing video anchoring stuff. So I just stayed where I was at, working part-time, Best Buy retail, which I was turned on to, pretty amazing opportunity to really learn about sales. And so here I am in the middle of Minnesota, new kid on the block, started a job part-time and turned into a career. So I spent 8 years or so at Best Buy and really started to get the entrepreneurial itch. So I grew up with a father that was a business owner. And so that meant for him, he didn't make a ton of money. He just was home all the time. And then I had a grandfather who did really well, and but he worked all the time. So for me, entrepreneurship wasn't really a thing I was pursuing, but sales and relationships and developing business was really something interesting for me. So I had an opportunity to work at Best Buy corporate, where I found a really interesting niche to sell water filters that go in your fridge to a bunch of the online internet retailers as a distributor at Best Buy. And while I was there, then I got recruited by one of my customers to come work for this small Inc. 500 fast growing e-commerce company with, less than 10 employees. And so being at a corporate job and driving already 40 miles, I was asked to join this small team. I was newly married, and it was going to be 100 miles one way. And so I said, it's probably not the time for me to do that, but we created a partnership where I was able to 1099 and create some side hustle income along the way and grow that business to a point where it made sense to actually leave and pursue it. So from that point in time, we grew that business from 10 employees to over 100 to over $50 million in online revenue. And that's where I was like, getting paid to learn, as opposed to going to college and doing the 4-year in the MBA where you have to pay a lot of money. I was getting paid decent money to learn, which was fun. All things biz dev, e-commerce, sales, marketing, technology, SEO, paid search, comparison shopping engines, data feeds, right? All this stuff kind of became a real passion. And I turned that passion for this enterprise corporate job, but the itch was getting harder to scratch. Like, to do your own thing means control of your time and having unlimited upside, as opposed to, a set salary and bonus potential. So, little this, little that, dabbling, importing, rings from China and trying to sell them on Amazon. I maybe have imported and sold hundreds of P90Xs, which I believe at the time were, I believe to be real, but I don't think they were. So, but Amazon, that night I woke up the next morning, we sold all 40. I was like, what? I had some debt, paid my parents back, and, on to the next thing. It was going to be Brett Favre jerseys from the Minnesota Vikings. When he first became a Viking from the Packers, I went and said, this is going to be amazing. Bought a bunch of jerseys and was selling them around the Metrodome, for 5 times what I paid for them. It was cool. But the foundation I had through the small business became a 100-person company, taught me everything I knew, and I was willing to kind of bet on myself at that point. So figuring out how to sell a private label product or your brand when all you've ever sold is other people's brands was the era I grew up. And it kind of kickstarted me into this next stage. If I can do this with water filters and air filters, really boring part numbers, not sexy at all, I can do this with really any category that you can find online. And we really, as nights and weekends would have it, after working lots of hours and starting a family, the side hustle turned into, a great opportunity to leave. So about a year later, I replaced my income, pretty decent executive salary, and hadn't taken a dime along the way. So I was able to sort of bootstrap it, and then at a point say, I'm out. I could choose when it was time to leave. And that's where things really just unleashed, and it's great. So in that point in time, we took a business from zero, grew it to 10 million in sales and sold it for roughly 10 million 5 years later. Bought another business along the way in e-commerce where we paid $750 for it and sold it for 2 years later for $2.5 million. So this is sort of the background I've experienced building my own business, helping grow brands online. And so now full circle, it's just this guy out of nowhere, decided to build a brand and, try to take control of his life. And, there's opportunity everywhere. So a little hustle, a little drive, a little grind, and a lot of faith. Here we go. So short
Awesome.
story, version, long version. I don't know. So.
No, that was perfect. That's awesome. I really love that. I think that if you don't have an accidental counterfeiting story in the beginning of your Amazon journey, you might not be doing it right.
Yeah. Right.
I definitely read into that super early on.
Yeah.
What I would love to know is, and I think this was one of the hardest issues for my Amazon business, and probably the one that kept me at 7 figures instead of scaling to 8, or even on beyond. So what do you think are some of the most important lessons to learn in terms of, scaling your Amazon business?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, but I think for us, the secret sauce was having very large contribution margin return on investment. And so, very simply put, if your cost of goods sold are less than 20% of your sales price, you can grow and scale and actually create cash that will support the growth, as opposed to the opposite, where a lot of businesses, when you run into much lower gross margins, you need to continue to leverage. And so for us, that allowed us to grow as fast as we did without having to go get some crazy extensive line and really grow into it. So I think people tend to get excited and discredit the $10 products, but if you're paying 70 cents for it or $1.20 landed, your cost of goods are less than 10% of the product. So you have margin. You put $1 in the machine and it actually pays you back $3 or $4, right? So you can level up pretty quickly that way, as opposed to buying something, for 20 and selling it for 40 and making the same margin dollars, $3 or $4 or $5, but you have to borrow a lot to move that needle. So
yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. So many people don't realize that, when I started out, my price points were fairly low. It was like 10 to 20 bucks probably. And it's because I saw the margin. Not only that, but I saw the Amazon can be a quantity game too, right? I mean, if you're doing tons of volume, then those numbers are a lot better. And like you said, investment wise, if you can sell $210 products at 50% or something like that, that's gonna beat out anything with a lower margin at a higher price point, right?
And there's a lot of ways too that people underestimate the power of testing that price point and understanding really where their brand sits. And there's a trade-off between price and rank, along with conversion that impacts your listing quality. Wow, got a spammer. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we're not going to give that guy any play, and we're also just going to lock the meeting at this point. But yeah, I guess we've caught the eye of somebody who's angry at life. So anyway, luckily I did not lose my train of thought here. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is on the margin volume game, or small low price point, high margin or high volume game, is you touch a lot more customers, right? So if you're selling a $1,000 bed and you're getting one customer, right, and you're making 30% margin on that bed, is that better than selling the $10 to $15 product to 200 people or whatever, and being able to maybe collect their addresses or their demographics or some of this valuable data that you can then go to scale your brand?
Yeah, no, it's a trade-off, right? And everything, like growing on Amazon is a machine locked inside a box, and you have access to the safe, but you really don't control what comes out of it. And so as opposed to building your own brand direct to consumer, to do it right is certainly harder, I believe, because the cost of media, the cost to create awareness, as opposed to where there's a captive audience right on Amazon, allows that really to be less of a concern. And it's cool because Amazon has really taken the approach of the way retail stores are doing it, right? So if you go down the aisle and you're going to down the health and beauty aisle, or the over-the-counter drugs, you're going to go find the Advil, and right next to it's going to be Target's brand, Up and Up, or in Walmart it's Great Value. So when you go to the Amazon aisle in the search bar and you type in painkiller, like Amazon's serving you all those options. And so I think from that point of view, your question about the volume versus dollars, like cost of doing business as well. Like if you think about the number of touches, from an FBA scalability side, returns on a bed are going to be significant. And what happens when you factor that into your cost of goods and start really looking at your P&L, as opposed to an item that's $9 that people just throw it away and often don't even return, so you have all these trade-offs. And so I think I'll go back to where I was at is, part of building a business model that scales is understanding what you're going to be really good at. Do I want to have a widget and I'm going to own number one, for that widget, and all I'm going to do is try to get to the top of the page in a $20 million a month market? Well, there's thousands of sellers in a $20 million a month market, right? And so there's this fine line between selling 100 but doing it 100 times, as opposed to selling it 1,000 or 10,000 and doing it only 10 times. We built a system that allowed us to own the space we were in without too many competitors, because it wasn't that sexy, right? So doing less sexy is sexy, and doing items that don't have big markets is also sexy. So
I couldn't agree with you more. I always tell people, so many people on Amazon, especially in the early days, were afraid to sell things like toilet plungers, toilet brushes, stuff like you said, that's not 100%. Sexy, that you don't want to be at the party saying like, oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I sell, bathroom supplies or toilet paper, something that's not sexy at all. But those are the people that were making some serious money. I remember talking to a client at one point who was selling caster wheels, the things you can, bolt onto like the bottom of desks or, whatever. 100%. Exactly. And those guys were pulling down, I can't remember the number. It was like $100 million a year or something ridiculous. My jaw dropped.
And you're like, what? It's like that show, it's TikTok guy is like, what car do you drive? Or what do you do for a living? Right. Nice car. What do you do? And he's like, I breed dogs. And you're like, okay. Yeah. And he's driving a Lambo. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the other really interesting fact that a lot of people don't realize, it sounds like we're really trying to promote, doing really cheap products, but disposal costs, right? From Amazon or getting stuff returned, right? If you try to get, mess with a return on a bed, if you're taking that inventory back, look at the space, and not only the space, but if you have to actually dispose of it, you're talking big dollars. Whereas if you have a low cost product, you can liquidate, you can destroy, you can, ship it somewhere else, and it's not going to take up a ton of room, all that fun stuff. So just a lot of kind of things to think about on the different options. Everybody always thinks, early in the Amazon days, there are all these courses and things that were like, $35 price point, this size, this is how much you invest. It was kind of like these rails, which, I guess if you've never done Amazon before, might be kind of helpful to learn. Right. But yeah. I always kind of laughed at that, because I'm like, well, I'm never, ever going to go off of those product criteria, because every jackass who's seen like 90% of the courses that teach that same thing are going after those products. And I don't want to be in that space.
And that's it, and to your point, like it's not about in the least, or even the more complicated, right? The more complex, like people are rushing to China and importing, and Alibaba and these things. Like our supply chain was 80% dependent on the US. And what's happening right now, like, yes, raw materials are going up, but like my freight compared to raw material increases right now is nominal. Like we can continue to do it. Now, it doesn't mean supply chain globally isn't impacted, right? But like, to your point, like USA is expensive, and like all these guardrails, like I'm glad I didn't follow a course. At the same time, like as long as you're okay with knowing that's a guideline, it's not a absolute, right? You have to just work backwards and define your goals. What do I want to do? Do I want to do one product, or do I want to build a business? And depending on what level of the spectrum you are, it takes different time and energy and effort and infrastructure to build.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually, a couple of episodes back, I talked to Steve Simonson, which hopefully everybody listening to this knows who he is. If not, he's a super awesome guy. Always just been like totally giving back to the Amazon community. And he's been kind of at the forefront in terms of, I've been talking about this a lot too. And he's totally dialed into, sourcing from different places, like he was, super early on to Vietnam, things like that. Amy's been really proactive, and she's got her Mexico thing coming up here soon. So and we talked a lot about how, all these sellers who are kind of doing the work now, like seeing the future, which is kind of written already. If you really look at all the different factors going on in the world, the sellers that are going to go to that spot before the others do, those are going to be the ones who succeed. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize now, with inflation, supply chain issues, all of that, is inventory is now super valuable, right? Like before, it used to be the other way around. Like a lot of times that inventory would depreciate, right? Now, a lot of that inventory is appreciating. It's like, oh, you can't get this anymore. Oh, great. Guess what? Like I've got this old product that I used to sell on Amazon. It didn't sell 2 years ago, but guess what? Now it's gangbusters because nobody else has it.
Yeah.
So,
wild.
It's one of those things where, if you guys really kind of go out to the macro level as sellers and kind of look at all these little factors, you're really going to start seeing some really great ways to kind of one up the guys who are just kind of sitting flat footed.
Well said, and that's the thing. Like changing for the sake of change, like changing a product. And I think that's also an evolution people are doing, like making a different design. Like, there's just so many options that you can do. There's no reason there's not another million sellers that can't be successful and exit. I still believe that. We right after we built our business and sold it, we immediately started another brand to continue to do what we know how to do, which, by the way, the large aggregators in the space don't know how to do, and which makes some of that skill set of finding, sourcing, launching, marketing products actually a pretty amazing, trade.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned that you've exited your business. I think you might have said, I might have missed it, but maybe more than one. So I would love to learn kind of what lessons that what did you do right? What did you do wrong? And how can our audience learn from that?
Yeah. So I'd been on the buy side of a transaction. Before we started our Amazon business, we bought a business. So I was familiar with that process a little bit in general. And I'd always been sort of attracted to the M&A and partnerships and finding, creative ways to do a deal. And so I don't know, if you're a sales biz dev guy, you feel like there's no way you can't get a deal done. And for us, it was really thinking about building something that has value and understanding when the right time to extract that value would be, right? And so thinking about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, when we started it, it was, we just want to leave corporate America. That was our why, and get away, decide our own rules. But working backwards, building a valuable asset is much different and going into it than I would do now, even, right? Because I've been there and done it. And so starting, going into it, failure is certainly part of that. We have a lot of products that have failed, probably 20 to 30% of what we launch. And that could be on the conservative side for sure. So, that's part of the game. But thinking about your question and the lessons learned, building the business in the beginning with the intent to sell. And so that doesn't mean you have to do everything perfect. It means you're getting your books, number one, in the beginning in order, and you're building a business on accrual-based accounting instead of cash, which is, sort of like keeping your receipts method, and how much did I make based on how much is left in the bank is gone. When you're running an inventory-based business, get on accrual right away, because, or even these tools now are so sophisticated. You get a $50 tool a month, you have good insights in your profitability, but that needs to translate to your books, that then translates to a tax return that you file. So doing that from the beginning, getting an accounting solution, invest in the service. You could probably go, 6 months to a year with nothing, right? But doing in the beginning with the trademark and all that process. And a lot of people, the game is different now, right? So like doing these things now are like investment, as opposed to before. You could just start selling and then fund your way to getting yourself up to code and up to the right spot. But those are some of the things in the beginning, which we had to stumble through. So for example, trademark and not doing it in the beginning, we were not allowed to use the original blue and green colors. Well, we had created 75 products that all had this blue and green color. And you know what kind of mess that was to have to undo and then relabel, because the blue and the green and the way our logo was not, we we're going to be sued unless we were able to negotiate with them that we would take that out. So like, pick your poison. Those things in the beginning, man. So I'm sure we could jam on all day on that stuff, but those come to mind.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I have similar stories too. Early on in my Amazon brand, I had a major corporation come after me. That was lots of fun. But it's all part of the learning experience, right? And there's so many people that we run into that are just afraid to get out the door because of issues like that. But you know what? You get through them. You figure it out. You make it work. The other few things I want to point out is two things that you mentioned that I think are probably some of the most important and probably the biggest overlooked. Knowing your numbers. When I was early on, it was just kind of like shooting from the hip, right? Being like, yeah, I think I'm going to make money there. I think that product's going to, be successful. It's like, no. Like, you do your homework, because in the long run, like, 6 hours of due diligence will probably, could save you millions of dollars if depending on the scale of your business. And the other thing I think is just personal development, right? Like if you're going through some hard times in your life, or you haven't done any work in terms of learning business basics, some accounting, just some really kind of basic business skills, you're going to have a really, really hard time, especially with the way the Amazon world is right now.
Well, and to that point, like I was that guy without that college, right? I didn't have my bachelor degree. And so like, I had opportunity to learn and grow and get paid to learn and grow and understand what a P&L was and a balance sheet. But if I didn't have that experience while I was getting paid for someone, it would be completely foreign. So it's an older book. It's called 7-Day MBA. Really takes you through all the core functions of an MBA and really spends time in some of those areas. So it was perfect because reading through, you can just study and hone in like, oh, this balance sheet, how does it change? And what's the impact to the P&L when we talk about inventory, right? So those are some things, you're right, that you definitely have to learn, but spend your time with a CPA, and that's the thing. People like, I don't like math. Like, well, that's your business is entirely based on math. And one keyword that you overspend on and continue to bid on is the difference between making tens of thousands and making zero, because you're not watching it when you don't know your numbers, to your point.
Yeah,
Solid.
I think, education sometimes is overrated. I have an MBA from a very great institution, and I can read Apple's 10K financial analysis, but that really didn't help me when starting my private label brand, because the type of numbers that you need to know as a startup are a little different than something your accountant is going to put, or something that, you're going to read in a 10K analysis in an MBA program. You don't have shareholders yet. You're not ready for that, right? I find the biggest struggle is that people don't know the basics of their numbers. They don't know how to calculate profit. And the tools that you mentioned earlier, yes, e-commerce has changed a lot. A lot of us are not just selling on Amazon anymore. And a lot of the tools are still just focused on Amazon, and they're not helping us gauge. So it gets
even harder. It gets even harder when you have multiple channels, because now you have to deal with technology systems, and you need to track your inventory layers, and you need to make sure you're receiving in your receipts to the POs. Like, we run a warehouse, a pretty sizable business model that, has lots of stuff moving in and out. And, the crux of the inventory system, there was all these cloud-based services forever, but what the problem is, none of them are full ERPs. So you still have a massive disconnect. And here's the thing, like, you don't need an ERP if you're just going to be Amazon, right? But it comes down back to your goals. Like, where are you going to sell? How are you going to make money? What is this? What's the exit plan look like this? Who wants to buy it? And so,
especially now that Amazon, it's much harder to be FBA only, because Amazon is really limiting that, and they're, changing. It's just changing a lot. So I think the core fundamentals that are the most important when it comes to getting ready to sell, or doing accrual-based accounting from the beginning, is, like you mentioned, have your numbers there, but also know what your monthly burn rate is, know what your overhead is every month, and then know what your profitability needs to get to cover that. And then, you have, because everybody else, they start with like one or two products, and they're just ticking along. They're like, yeah, my profit on these one or two products is good, but because they're not syncing that up with their profit and loss, and they don't know what their monthly burn rate is, they're never getting to the point where their profitability, even if those products are profitable, is covering their overhead and it's looking good to a buyer. So for me, I'm going through the process of selling my business right now, my private label. And that's been the biggest thing that has just been like a game changer for me, is like, monthly number, I just need to make sure this is over here is consistent. My unit economics are consistent, and it covers that. So I love that advice. I think it's so smart. Run your own numbers from the beginning. That's awesome. So along that line, what would you say is the number one thing? I talked about my biggest struggle was connecting the P&L with the, my unit economics. Well, what would you say is the biggest thing that you see people struggle with when they're ready to exit? Like, what's that thing that just holds them up?
Well, you named it. And I think every brand on the face of the earth, unless they've running an enterprise where this is what they do professionally, are all like you navigating it, because there's always ways to improve. And those improving steps take time, like just to go undo the last 8 months, right? To change the way you want to do it, to get it ready so it smooths out this year. But I would say this, to your point about the unit economics, you can, whether you spend, $50-$60 on monthly, something like Seller Board or any of the other tools where you plug in your cost data, start there. Because the other point you mentioned is coming up with this budget, and the concept of a budget is exactly what it is. But to your point, like just running the business blind as opposed to where that cash is going, is it in inventory, and not having a clear balance sheet. You might be making money in the thing, and you look in your bank account and you're saying, I don't understand. And so there's this disconnect again between what you see from one system and what the P&L says, and how do you make the math work? So I think it's early on getting that baseline of QuickBooks, because you can always go back and do journal entries, right? But building, whether if you don't have the ability to buy the software now, which you should if you have a sustainable business, but doing it in a spreadsheet, it's super simple. You run the last 12 months of unit sales, layer in your costs, your estimated fees, all the commissions inbound, right? And build your own P&L, right? So is there money left over? The problem with that is you're building it in accrual. You're not understanding what inventory you need to buy to support those cost of goods sold, right? And so then that's where you layer in this budget of what that cash is going to require to grow and scale. And everyone's been there like, oh man, I got to write a 20 or 10 or $5,000 first PO. Like, where's this money going to come from? And then wait, I haven't even gotten all of it back, and I got to go turn around and buy another one because it's going to take 60, 90 days to get here, and then I got to write a freight check, right? Just to get it here once the suppliers released it. So
yeah. And so along that line, something that I think a lot of people struggle with is margin. Because they're not tracking this, they don't realize that they're behind every time, right? So they're not realizing that with this little, even before advertising 20% margin or whatever that they have, which I would probably argue that's the second biggest struggle people have with selling their business. They don't have enough margin. Their profit margin is just way too low. Their advertising spend is way too high. So that's the most common struggles that I see people having. But that being said, there's all this argument in the industry about margin and what margin is good. And the Amazon courses used to always teach 3X. And I'm like, nope, that's bullshit. You're never going to have enough margin in the long run. That doesn't even allow space for advertising, right? If you're selling $1,000 product, then 3X might be okay. You might get a little extra, but so, I try to at least do 7 to 10X, because that way I have room for shipping fluctuations and advertising spend and that kind of stuff. But what would you say about margin and its importance to being able to sell and really have a higher valuation for your company?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, margins give you margin of error, and both on the windfall side, very rarely that's the case, right? You're always having to have more expenses. So building in more, well, what does more mean to your point? And I think people can get lost in this multiplier on cost of goods or what that looks like. To me, everything is reverse engineered from what is the market I want to serve. I want to sell diapers. Okay. I want to sell diapers. If I do, take any tool and scrape the page, I'm going to know that's a $20 million or $50 million a month market. Who commands the best diapers? Then I'm going to profile the product. Is it a 24 count? What's my cost per diaper, right? What are my economics? So I'm building out first to understand what is it that I'm selling compared to what the market offers, and how am I going to beat them, right? And so when you set your price, especially as a brand new product with no brand recognition up against Huggies, like good luck. So that's a separate topic, but related to this is every market to me needs a scalpeled approach before moving into that product. So for example, if I'm going to compete with a $20 product, I need to very clearly go in to find my strategy. Am I going to sell a multi-pack and create more value that way? Am I going to start with a 1-pack and just also add it to and see which one sells the most? Well, I got to invest in inventory to do that. To your point, but if we work backwards, what is the market price I want to sell it for? Is that going to be at the current retail, or is it at the lowest price I could sell it at? Because you should probably start there, knowing that if that's the lowest price you could sell it at, and that's your starting point, you probably shouldn't get into it, right? So, and that might be 2X. That might be, well, it's probably going to be 2. Like your point, if it's $1,000 item, it'd be very hard to do a 2X times cost or 3X. But working from the top backwards will then layer in, I will have 30% margin or 35% margin before I have ad spend, right? And so that means all the fees have to come out, the inbound freight. So that's the way I like to do it. We build it from the backwards and move into it, and then try to source it, giving a true target cost to your supplier.
Yes.
And putting in a buffer there, knowing that when you would really want to be at 10, that you're trying to get it for 8, right? You tell them that's your target price, right? But again, is that landed shipping now? So now you have an inbound factor and customs. So then you work backwards again. So yeah, you could go on.
I love what you said about price, because I see so many people, they'll overdevelop a product trying to differentiate in a way that matters. And then they spend too much money on the product, and then they price it way above the market. And, instead of making it easy for a customer to choose them and going with the minimum viable product, they're just overdevelop, and then they got no margin left. And they're like, I'm hoping I can sell it for that $20 product for $60. And it's like,
you're like, why did you think that? Why did you think that? Well, because no one else has the zipper that does this. And you're like, well, why does someone see a value in that zipper that does that? I don't. It's just cool. It's great. It's a good feature. Well, then you're going to have a tough time selling it for $20 more.
Yeah. Nobody's searching for that product with the zipper that does that.
Yeah.
Not a keyword.
but it doesn't have to be necessarily if that was a benefit and you can include it for free.
Yes, right. And you're making the choice easy at the same price.
Yeah,
I love it.
Exactly.
Speaking my language. So speaking of margin, PPC costs, I mean, they're just getting insane, right? I think, Amazon's adding all sorts of new ad types, which is exciting. But it just overall, like you can't get away without advertising. You really have to start advertising off of Amazon. Andy and I have been preaching on this for years. It's funny that Amazon conferences, they're finally talking about external traffic.
They are.
And Andy and I have been talking about it since the dawn of time. It's like we already knew this, right? But either way, we're there now, right? We're there where we got to spend money in external traffic. We got to spend money on PPC, but it's really eating up a lot of the margin. So I know that that's a big struggle with people trying to sell their businesses, because it eats into your margin. So what do you suggest? What are people doing now that you're seeing that is really moving the needle in terms of reducing PPC costs and bringing in more sales?
Reducing PPC costs is an ever-changing, ongoing redoing, algorithm of sorts with a manual strategy, so it's constant management. I mean, to be honest, there's no other way. You need to be driving traffic to the listing externally. Sure. Absolutely. But to your point, it's all the economics into the unit itself, unless you're looking at lifetime value, which again, now, like we're looking at a lot more data inside Amazon that we can get familiar with this, subscriptions and subscription rates, like those are all part of that. But PPC costs, when I started, the day they launched, were 1 cent and 2 cents. And I spent $4 in sales and had $4 in spend and had 10 grand in sales the first week. And I was like, is this real? Like, the day it came out. And so now it's, most things are way too much, but conversion rates counter that. So again, we're talking about what's a good margin or what's a good PPC cost or what's a good optimization trade-offs. If your conversion rate, have you guys ever had a product that a good product or your top product that had over 100% conversion rate? That doesn't even make sense, but it does. It's the way they used to measure it was units divided by sessions, right? So if I sold 110 units to 100 people, that my conversion rate, 110 units to 100 sessions, right, is more than 100%. So you can counter PPC costs with a better performing converting listing. So I don't have an answer on PPC costs. I really don't, because I don't set them, right? And it's a bidding system. And I'll tell you this, it's always been hard. It was hard in Google. We did it back in the day in Google, where we were spending 200 grand a month in Google. And it was hard then, no different, right? But that case, we had an email address and we had lifetime value with assumptions we had. Wrong. Acquire customers. It's always a funnel. So,
and that's where you see people really now, the latest strategies that we're seeing at e-commerce and Amazon conferences is get that email from the beginning, plan your launch list before you even launch. Like, you shouldn't be launching on Amazon without having an email list, without having an interested list. Your inserts need to drive people back where you're getting emails like that. And then you're cross-selling, you're upselling, you're working on your conversions. If you can convert people organically, you're going to win the game, right? Because then PPC is just like, it's fine. I don't care if my ACOS is 50% because who cares? I'm making so many sales, organically.
Right. And what's the source of that traffic though? How is it? Is it some influencer that's driving like, one-time deals? And so is that sustainable to pay X dollars for a post or a commission when that's just, a one-time thing? So what scales up systematically? And it's obviously related stuff to your keyword on Google, but it's also someone with a massive audience. And so, I don't know if you guys ever, even your own email list, right? You can only hit them so hard and wring the towel so much before you've squeezed the juice out. And people are tired of hearing from you, and your unsubscribe rate goes down, right? So you have this massive macroeconomic fighting that's happening between all of these things, but you got to do them.
Yeah, so, I love media. I love Google ads. I love, growing the email list, but you don't want, like you said, to your point, you're not trying to just grow your email list all of a sudden. Like, it needs to be a steady flow, right? You need to have that funnel going. So love it. Okay, I have another important question. What about in-stock rates? In-stock rates, like that is one of the hardest things, especially since COVID. I mean, I'm tired. I'm tired.
I love it. I love this topic. I love inventory management because long ago when we were managing thousands and thousands of SKUs in our own building, and then thousands and thousands of dropship SKUs, multi-channel, wholesale, retail, and e-commerce. That was the company we helped grow to 50 million. You would have salespeople stealing inventory, right, for the direct-to-consumer channel. So we built lots of rules and lots of planning. But when you think about this world, inventory planning is important. And we do it, you can do it three ways. I don't know if you guys or many of the listeners do kitting or assembly, or if they're doing that on their own, or if they're just having suppliers sending goods directly to Amazon. But in either case, we built a 3-step planning kind of tool, all in Google Docs, amazing. And it's looking at inventory today in our building, inventory at Amazon. And we're constantly, based on every SKU's lead time, we are running inventory weekly to make sure that a PO is in motion based on the lead time to get here, to then have enough time to turn it around and send it to FBA, but also have enough time to create multi-packs, 2-packs, bundles. And so that process is looking at a lot of different data points, and no one in the space, there's a couple of guys out there that have done it, but I'm very surprised because this is a massive issue. Like, one of the number one things when we sold our business to an aggregator that they did, they just decided to buy more inventory, like just everything you wanted. And we thought we had it dialed in. Everything that we wanted, they added 20% to it. And the business grew. No stock outs, just the business grew from doing that. Like, obviously there's other factors, ranking that comes along on newer products, et cetera. But so yes, inventory stock rates. What's your concern? How do you plan? How do you do it? What's the best practice?
Well, I think just, it has a huge impact on your profit. If you're, I have learned this the hard way during the pandemic, being out of stock of my bestseller that's covering my overhead cost and giving me profitability over the top of it, out of stock 3 times. And I have new products, new variations that I launched that are now a year late, and I'm having to
then making up. And making up the lost ranking gap and what happens there,
Luckily it's a product that very easily gains rank again because it's not a saturated market. But yeah, it's like, that's what my question is like, basically you already answered it. You said, like, look, we get ahead of it. We plan, we have a system for ensuring that we're not out of stock. Right. But yeah, it's huge. It's a huge factor in whether or not you're going to be able to sell your business. If you're constantly out of stock of your best sellers and your profit one month looks great, because you're trying to get that monthly recurring revenue to look good. Right? Like consistent, steady growth, right?
Yep. A little bit of growth.
Yeah. And when you're out of stock, it's just insane, it can really have a deep impact. So you kind of already answered it. You said, get ahead of it, have a plan, and then you talked about how the aggregator did it, which is they just ordered more. And don't be afraid to take a chance if you've already got really great products, they're already selling, like, what would that look like? Do some scenario mapping and see if that would seriously move the needle, so I love it.
And I think too, like having a 3PL and moving into that method where you have cross stock, because that's what happened last year. We didn't have issues even when FBA shut off because we still had stock. And so FBM didn't really affect us conversion rate or sales wise because the other option was nothing because everyone else was out of stock. We had stock in our building, right? So, having a 3PL strategy as a backup, having an FBA and an FBM listing, which means you have a 3PL that when the FBA does come out, or if it's just in time, that you're not going 1, 2, 3 days while that FBA stock gets checked in. If it happens to go out of stock, it just switches over to FBM listings, right? So these are things that are really tactical that we did and that allowed us to continue to grow without having too many issues. But I'll tell you this, it's super easy to do it in a spreadsheet. I mean, literally a business reports in Seller Central and your FBA inventory. And then you plug in all of your lead times from your suppliers and your desired inventory on hand. And you can build enough formulas to have fun and make sure you never run out of stock. You'll be surprised on the results, especially when you factor in that you got to get the next order moving in, while the other one is still on its way, sometimes depending on the lead time. So super simple.
Awesome. I love that. It's great info for people to dig in on. One of the things I'm curious about, and the aggregator space is heated up a lot. There's a lot of people looking to acquire e-commerce and especially Amazon businesses. Can you give me an overview so that the people listening kind of really understand what is an aggregator? What is it? What are some of the other options to consider besides aggregators? What's the benefit? What are some of the downfalls? Kind of, if you could just kind of give us a walkthrough of that whole world, I would love to have your feedback on that.
Yeah, it's a great question because if you reverse time and think about who are traditional buyers, you have a couple buckets of buyers. You have the solopreneur guy who has some money, wants to leave his job, take on something of his own, right? That's usually a smaller business acquirer, a smaller business buyer. Then you have these family offices or private equity groups, depending on the size and how many funds they have. Basically, a group of guys with their money and some investors' money and buying and having third parties run them and, that type of model. But until the last 3 years, 2.5 years, when Amazon said, hey, we'll allow multiple seller accounts, this concept of rolling together brands became what we call now the aggregator model, where you would aggregate multiple brands and hope to improve your margins by reducing your corporate overhead, right? And so doing it at scale means all these different things we do to run an Amazon business, if we do them at scale at the best quality, there's no reason we can just remove all these guys making $500,000 and $1 million and run that into the new company structure and grow. And so now you have what we call about 100 plus aggregators, 12, 13, $14 billion of funding across institutions and various investors that are gobbling up the top 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 brands. The market's changed drastically though, because you used to be able to, no one would buy your business. They thought it was a very scary asset, right? So that would mean if you have a lot of brands out there, not many buyers, your multiples are lower because it becomes a buyer's market. And on the flip side, what we had was a whole lot of buyers with a whole lot of money fighting for a very handful, or let's call it a handful relative to the total sellers, the top 1,000, 2,000 sellers that have the best businesses, the largest businesses where these guys are bringing them up. And so now we're seeing valuations go up, supply and demand, like good old fashioned economics that are driving prices up, which made it a great time to sell. And so you're going to see these ebbs and flows, but I think we're going back now into steady eddy of some of the multiples curving down, just because some of the buyers have already folded. Some of the aggregators have folded. Some of them have been consolidated already. Some of them are throwing in the towel because it's hard. And if you're a seller and we know it's hard as individuals, corporate structures really don't exist managing Amazon businesses. It's very, very different. So this is the first of its breed, right? Hopefully that was an overview.
No, that was great. And I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. It's funny because when that business model first came out, That's kind of exactly what I thought about. Is I was like, okay, so they're taking a business and possibly acquiring it from, a 2 to 3 person company. Maybe they got some VAs, maybe they got some, outsourced workers and things like that. And then throwing it into the ring of a large company that's maybe employing, 10 different people to kind of cover all the different aspects of that business. And the idea there is, oh yeah, we're going to scale it. But I think what happened there is some of the aggregators got a little crazy, got ahead of themselves and just started burning tons and tons of cash. Whereas probably some of the medium to smaller size aggregators who did a lot more due diligence because they couldn't throw money at it. Right. It's just like, it's just like the Silicon Valley startups where they, if they get $100 million in funding, you hear it all the time. Like, oh, this company went out of business. They burned through the entire 100 million. Whereas you hear on the flip side, the bootstrap guy who had, a couple grand and a great idea and just grinded and ended up selling for that amount of money. So it's really interesting how those dynamics kind of play out.
I'm sure they'll mature and we'll see, like for us in our example, like we help different brands and a lot of times we have opportunities to invest in them now. And so coming alongside brands, helping them grow, we're seeing new models evolve. And like, for example, our business, we partner with brands where we actually help them operationally on the marketing side and create a valuable exit by putting together a package and being their sort of CFO, CRO, CMO, COO, fractional to see what scale looks like. But that only works at certain levels, right? So it's all about the economics. But yeah, we'll see what happens in the years to come. But I still believe long-term, you can throttle up with new products. You can throttle up with new brands because the cost to service them from an operating expense standpoint is very low.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is when you have cash to put into a business that's expanding, especially on the inventory side, like we talked about earlier, where that's now an asset, right? That's an appreciating asset at the moment. That's not necessarily a bad plan unless you really, muck something up. But this is one of my other favorite parts of the episode where we kind of delve into like the personal development side of things, because I think that's so important in terms of having a successful business, no matter what it is. So you had already mentioned, I looked up 7-day MBA. I didn't find it. I found 10-day, which I think might be the one you're talking about. So I found 10-day MBA.
It's probably the same one.
Yeah. I figured I do that all the time too. Like the 8-hour work week, the 7. No, yeah. So that's a great. I've never read that. I'm actually going to dig in because I mean, in my life, the accounting side of things has always been really, really hard for me. And just some of those really business kind of basics. So I'm definitely going to dig into that. But anything else that has made a big impact on you in terms of motivation, personal development, things you've read, kind of anything in that realm, podcasts, like anything that you feel like has made a big impact on your entrepreneurial journey?
I talk about this in my book a lot, and it has to do with like exit planning as well and figure out what's next and really understanding who you are and how you're wired. And for me, I wanted my time back. And so I wanted the freedom and the choice. And so to do that means I had to be really good at some things to do them more efficiently and try to not do the things I don't like. And so, I've been a part of, we implemented EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, and read the book Traction and, a leadership team, 7 people with 100 employees. You had departments and different levels of management. I really, their self-development, personal development, I would challenge everyone to do this, is looking through their day-to-day and auditing their time and where they spend their time. Because anytime I'm doing low value activity, it's you really don't realize opportunity cost until years go by. And then you go, what did I do with my time? Right. And so that's the same example. Every day you choose to do something that's $10, $15, $20 value an hour. So right now in my world, it's a great world because I get to be near my family, my inspiration, my passion, my faith. I get to engage and serve in different ways and give, but I'm still in the business working maybe 10, 20 hours a week on strategy, on the things that I love, and all the other things are happening. And that started with me being the doer, but over time reinvesting in myself, which means I had to take delegation seriously so I can elevate, my capacity, because it's up here, not necessarily even work capacity, because I can handle a lot. Creating capacity in your brain to think and process helps you make less mistakes and help you actually move more succinctly. So those are like my big things, the EOS and even the E-Myth. Michael Gerber was a speaker, author of the E-Myth at a Prosper show 3-4 years ago gave me the aha moment again to work on my business, not in. I made the decision to hire a grinder, which is my brother, a product development guy who just literally spent the last 3 years just doing products. And we were able to, move far beyond I could ever do it on my own, doing it this here and there. So scale.
Awesome. I love that. All right. Last but not least, how can people get a hold of you and anything else you want to mention?
Yeah. Aggregator Navigator, the book I just wrote, will help you create a profitable business and plan it for an amazing exit. It's just an hour read. Brandedseller.com. Check it out. We're a full service agency, both 3PL marketing and exit planning. But find me on LinkedIn, Josh Dietrich, DITTRICH.com. Wait.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. I
Thanks, guys.
appreciate you having on. As usual, everyone, if you haven't done so yet, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends. Hopefully they'll get some great stuff out of the podcast. We really, really appreciate everybody who joins us live, minus the people who are uninvited, but it's all good. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you next time on the Seller Roundtable. All right, I have to go jet and pick up my kids, but Josh, great chatting with you. Good to see you, Amy. We'll talk soon.